Right, good evening, everyone. As Sarah said, my name is Brenna Galvin, and I'm a shareholder and attorney at Mazer, Amundson, and Boggio. We're just down 35W South from here. Some of you have come, and there's a few friendly faces. You've been to multiple of these series, and some of you, this might be your first time. So the content that we're going to cover today some of it will be review of what we've covered in other sessions, but we're going to try to cover some new ground and some territory specifically related to the senior housing landscape and some legal and practical tools. So you feel a little bit more empowered that you have the skills and resources you need when you're acting as a caregiver, or if you're trying to be a good care receiver for your loved one as well. So tonight we will cover the legal and practical planning tools, review the senior housing landscape and the corresponding costs, and recognize the resources for managing and evaluating chronic condition. So who are caregivers? They're often in studies, they're frequently hard to define because we don't do a good job explaining or recognizing ourselves as caregivers. We are talking often about serving as a loved one or a spouse or a child, and we then get shoved into this caregiver role, whether or not we are willing or able or have the tools. So really, any one of us can become a caregiver or need care. And so it's important to identify and figure out, am I caregiving for a loved one or a neighbor? Am I doing this for a spouse or a child maybe with a disability? It could happen to any one of us. And I think that if you've been here before, you've heard me talk about Rosalind Carter, because she said it best when she said, there's only 4 types of people in this world, and they are those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. So it's really ubiquitous. It affects all of us. And the stats might be a little old, but they are still fairly accurate in that we see a huge portion of the population end up reporting that they've been a caregiver for a loved one, and specifically for older adults. So we've got 44% of the population identifying themselves as a caregiver for a parent, and we have 7% as a spouse or a partner. And many times as we start talking with individuals, we find out that they're caregivers not only for one older adult, but often multiple in their lives. They'll have a neighbor that they're checking in on informally. They're having a child with a disability that they need to take care of and touch base with. They're having a spouse that might either have an acute crisis, a hip replacement that requires some temporary care, or a parent or a loved one with longer term care needs. So we see all of us falling into this role pretty frequently, but we don't always have the tools to know how to navigate it best. And AARP has done a lot of research about the cost of caregiving in our country. And what we found is that there are so many people providing informal care that there's millions and millions of dollars that would have otherwise gone for formal caregivers these are wages lost, amounts that would have been paid out if you had to hire it done. But 34.2 million Americans have provided unpaid care to an adult age 50 or older in the last 12 months. So we know that it's happening in our communities and we're taking care of one another, but how do we make sure that we know how to navigate it? If you've heard me do any seminar before, I always reiterate 3 priorities, and I keep driving them home to you because I really want to be sure that you make decisions early when we're planning. We have some ability to to plan or take action if you're in crisis, but we have more tools and more options if we plan prior to a crisis. So it's great if you're here tonight and you're thinking prospectively. If you're in the midst of caregiving and feeling a little lost, don't worry. There's still things that you can do to make your life easier and to alleviate some of the stress. But the more we can do to plan ahead and lay the foundation and groundwork, the better. The other thing I really want people to do is start identifying who's a part of your team. Who's a part of your caregiving team? It's not just one caregiver and care receiver. It takes a community. And we often think about that when we talk about children, right? It takes a village to raise a child. It really takes a village to get old in this country as well. Okay, so we really need to build a team of experts that you can lean on whenever you need to. And each of them will bring a different component to making sure that you have the best quality of life possible as both the caregiver and the individual in need of care. Typically, when I talk with my clients who are caregivers, they explain that they feel like they've taken a dive into a deep end, right? And they don't have their floaties on. They don't have a kickboard. They've got nothing, right? So they're often frantically kicking and trying to stay above water. I don't want this to be you, but if you feel that way, know that you're not alone. A lot of individuals who are becoming caregivers, whether intentional or unintentional, feel like there's so much to handle, it becomes very overwhelming very quickly. I think about it as often when we talk about pool safety in the summer, we say, just so you know, drowning doesn't look like drowning, right? From the outside, we don't know that our loved ones are really suffering with this and trying to navigate all of these issues, be it legal concerns or financial concerns or the emotional, psychological components of the stress that's related to caregiving. They're desperately, though, trying to stay above water, and the least we can do is give a life raft, okay? So one of the first things that I talk to my clients about is getting organized and making sure that you have all the resources you need in one spot. Okay, I call it a one-stop shop. You can call it whatever you want. Some people create binders for their loved ones. Some people just make sure that there's a file with contact information, important paperwork. But what you really want to do is start assembling this paperwork and documentation. It's a big job, okay? You don't want to try to have to find this information in the midst of your loved one being hospitalized or needing external care and trying to coordinate that. So it's good to start gathering this information early, and I've given you some tips tonight about what should be contained in your one-stop shop. When I'm working with caregivers, often the first few months of caregiving feels like an investigation, right? They don't know how their loved one kept records. They don't know necessarily all their wishes. They don't have all the things that they need at their fingertips. So the more that we can put together in this one-stop shop, the better. So I'd like you to make sure that, and we'll talk a little bit more about a healthcare directive specifically, but I'd like to make sure that in your one-stop shop, one of the most important papers that you can have in it is a healthcare directive. There's also HIPAA release forms or authorizations to release medical information. This is really helpful if your loved one might have a physical need or maybe some signs of memory loss, but they're not incapacitated, right? They can do a lot on their own, but they might need a little help with things like coordination or scheduling appointments. They might need you to talk with their doctor to make sure you have all the same information. And so we want to make sure that there's a waiver or an authorization that allows you to have access to their protected health information. This can help all of us, even if we're not currently in need of care. So in my household, we just did that. My husband and I just made sure that we had these waivers signed so we could help with scheduling or delegating that appointment booking. We also want doctors' contact information. So for your children who might not go to your appointments frequently, often they don't know who your primary care physician is, right? They might not know who you call if you're in need of some medical advice. Okay, so make sure that you have your primary contact as well as any specialists you see on a regular basis. It's also very important for your loved ones to have access to a medication list. What are you taking? How frequently do you take it? Where do you pick up your prescriptions? Those items become something that if someone needs to manage it for you, it would help them to have a baseline knowledge of that. I also tell clients who are going to appointments with their loved ones, make sure you have a place where you can keep your clinic notes. Oftentimes we get so busy we're jotting it down on anything and everything that we can, right? Whatever piece of paper or mail you had in your wallet or in your purse, you're writing down these notes and they get lost easily, right? We want to be sure that you have a reference point that if you're in stress or you're trying to navigate through a chaotic situation, you can refer back to this reference point and list. And a calendar with upcoming appointment schedules is really helpful as well. Health insurance information should also be put in this list. You don't necessarily need your physical cards there. You can just put a copy, but make sure that people know who your primary insurance is or your supplementary insurance provider, those provider or member ID numbers, so people can call and make sure if there's a claim or an issue related to insurance that they have the right information. They will be asked every time you go to see a provider, right? Has your insurance changed? Do you have a copy of your card? We want to be sure that they have that information accessible. I also tell my clients to kind of fill out, and when we meet together, I have them put together a financial inventory. It's a big job. They don't always like me for asking them to do this, right? I send out a questionnaire and there are like 24 pages. Don't worry, they don't all apply to you, right? But we want to be sure that we capture somewhere where your accounts are held and how they're titled, about how much are in them. If they have direct deposits or auto pays associated with them, that's important. If you're no longer able to manage it and someone else needs to step in to do it, this information would be critically important for them. We also want to identify sources of income. So I worked with a family, and this is a good example, where their mom entered long-term care, and she had been declining for a number of years. She had memory loss, and she went from living independently to living in a home with a child to then living in a secured memory care unit. And during that time, the daughters and I have spent probably about a year trying to track down who was depositing this income stream into the account. What's it for? Is there a cash value associated with it? What could this possibly be? Is it an annuity? Is it a pension? We had no idea. And that was information that we would have needed had she lived a little bit longer, and even after she passed, to figure out, is there a death benefit associated with this? Is there something that could be utilized to help them pay for care on her behalf? So these are things that, the less your kids have to call around or hire someone to call around for them, the better. If you know this information, let's make sure it's put down somewhere that's accessible to them. And, some people say that's a lot of work to write this down in a separate spreadsheet. So you can just print statements too, if that's helpful, whatever way you account. What I would say though, if this is only housed on your computer and you're the only one with a password for it, think carefully, right, about whether that's the best location for the one-stop shop. Okay, we want this data to be accessible to your loved ones. We also want to make sure, sometimes I notice with children more so than spouses, right, that they don't know whether the tax returns were filed or whether their loved one even needed to file taxes. So they're trying to gather or figure out, has this been done? Who's their accountant? Have they worked with someone? So the more we can put together in this one-stop shop, the better. Now, some of you might say, I don't like to share all this with my kids right now. If it's a neighbor or a loved one, I don't want them to have access to all of my account numbers and financial inventory at this point. We want to talk about how we have a talk with them to make sure that they know where they can locate this information if something happens to you, but where it's secure and safe at this moment. So, how many of you attended the Healthcare Directives seminar last month? Show of hands. Okay, a few of you. So some of this will be a little bit of a review, an abbreviated version, but if you weren't there with us, I would recommend that you check out the replays of that session, because Deborah Laxon did just an incredible job talking about how to select agents, how to make sure your agents are well prepared for their duties. And she's also got resources and tools on her website, as well as a book that you can access here at the library or with her. So I want to talk to you a little bit about healthcare directives, because they are so important to my clients and their caregivers. Healthcare directives used to be called living wills or powers of attorney for healthcare. Since 2008 in Minnesota, we know them and love them as healthcare directives. Okay? The most important thing you can do in your directive is nominate a healthcare agent. Period. So we can also provide the agent, and should also provide them, with some preferences about what your wishes are related to your care and treatment. But the least if you can't think or talk about anything else, we need to be sure that you nominate a legal agent who can make decisions on your behalf related to your health care if you can't speak for yourself. Oftentimes my clients say, I don't really need that, I'm married. My spouse can do that for me. No, a spouse does not have the ability to make medical decisions on your behalf. You are the only one with that ability unless you name a legal agent. Okay? So marriage isn't alone. Child relationship is not enough either. Okay? We need to be sure that there's someone named with the power to make care-related decisions. You can also tell this agent, and you should tell them a little bit about what your values are related to your treatment, course of treatment. Some people feel very strongly about end-of-life care or only wanting hospice or palliative care. Other people have had a chronic condition that they've been managing a long time, and they want to give their agent some of the background about, if we proceed in this way, I would like you to try this course of treatment. If it's not working, please withdraw it. We can give some information and context to the agent so they feel confident and empowered to make those decisions on your behalf if you can't. We also can tell your agent some of your preference about what you want done with your body after you die. Okay, do you prefer cremation, burial? In Washington, the state of Washington, they're looking at how you can decompose bodies, right? So there's lots of wishes that people have related to their end of life and their funeral or memorial. Okay, so if those things are important to you, we want to be sure that the directive clearly outlines your wishes on the topics. People get very nervous about choosing the right form for a healthcare directive. And what I want to say is that any form is better than no form. So there are lots of options out there and a lot of free resources. The Honoring Choices of Minnesota has 2 forms available online for free. One's a very short version. Really, it nominates an agent, and that's about it. The other is a long form that gets into your values and what quality of life means to you and some of those questions that you'd want to be sure to address with your agent. The University of Minnesota also has a healthcare directive form that's accessible and available online. And there's an organization called 5 Wishes, which does offer forms, but they do charge a nominal fee, I think, of under $5 to access that form online. Your attorney can also help you. Sometimes your healthcare providers can walk through these forms with you as well. I know that many of the larger health systems do have forms available to their patients. What I see a lot when I talk to my clients about healthcare directives is that frequently they have gotten a form, it's just sat on their dining room table. I see some head nods, so it might be you, it might be your loved one, but I really want to encourage you to actually take the steps to complete it and sign it. It does require 2 witnesses or a notary to be fully executed, but we want it in fully completed. I had a client recently that said, oh yeah, my mom has one of those, and we couldn't find one signed copy. She had one. She had scratched some of her wishes down, but had never executed the document. We don't want that to be you, okay? We don't want to go through any extra muss or fuss and cost, delay, expense, or pain trying to figure out what you would have wanted. We want to be able to look at this document and know and feel empowered. There's also a document in Minnesota called a provider's order for life-sustaining treatment. It is a medical form. It's a doctor's order. It's not something that you can get online or do with your attorney. You must do it with your doctor. And this form is really geared towards end-of-life decision-making. What type of care or treatment you would want, such as CPR, so resuscitation or intubation, feeding tubes. It goes through a number of these issues and asks you whether or not you want that course of treatment. Now, why do you need a POLST if you have a healthcare directive? Often my clients are like, I already told my agent what I wanted, and that should be enough, isn't it? Well, it does help your agent and it does help your care providers, but emergency medical professionals or EMTs only have one standing order, and that's to get you alive to the closest medical facility for treatment. So if you want an EMT to be able to not resuscitate you, we need another document in place that indicates that. And if you live in the 8-county metro area, your healthcare directive and your POLST should be on your refrigerator. Right next to the picture of your grandkids, right? Right next to the anniversary picture, we want your POLST and your healthcare directive hanging there. The firefighters, EMTs, police officers have been trained to look in that spot to see if you have a document there, if they come to treat you at home. So these documents are good to have on the face. They're necessary to have, but the most important thing we can do after signing them is have a talk with our loved ones about what our wishes are. And having the talk can be challenging. It's a hard subject to broach. And some people feel really comfortable talking about their wishes, about care and end of life. Some people really struggle with where to start or approaching this topic. So often I tell people there's a few tips that I have. The first would be use popular culture or events happening in the news and media as a guide. So like about maybe 2 years ago now, Barbara Bush decided to forego any ongoing treatment, and she entered hospice care. And the country saw newspaper articles about this treatment and this decision, and it made national news. This is a good way to talk to people and say, did you see that Barbara Bush elected hospice? What are your feelings about hospice? What do you think about continuing treatment or deciding to stop treatment? Have you thought about what you want? Well, I can tell you what I've thought about and what I want, right? So we can use this as a conversation starter if we're having a hard time doing that ourselves. There's also a free resource online called the Conversation Project. The Conversation Project started with the idea that we need to have more guided conversations about our wishes and about end of life. And so they wanted to give tools for families to utilize, and they have those available online, and they're a great resource to walk through with your loved ones. And then if you like games, if you're card players, in my family we tend to prefer euchre personally, but that's an Indiana thing, less so a Minnesota thing. But Go Wish is a great card game that we can utilize. Go Wish is a way to organize our thoughts and value priorities about care and treatment. So you might draw a card and it says, how do I feel about care if care costs are, exceeding my income and draining my life savings, right? Do I feel like I would still want care at any cost? Or do I feel like maybe finances weigh heavily on my mind? Or what if I couldn't move in the same way that I do now, or I function in my body in the same way? Would that matter to me? Or am I comfortable if I can't move my body in the way that I currently am? Or it could focus on more, if I don't recognize my loved ones, do I still want care? Or do I want continuing care? So it allows you to use these items like corresponding with your loved ones, or moving your body in a way, or financial decisions, and organize them in order of preference and priority. And that way you can kind of show a chain of what really matters to you and what really matters to maybe your loved one. And it could be different between spouses, between kids and parents, but really the idea is let's make sure that your agent, your healthcare agent, your loved ones know what your values are and what your priorities are. I tell a story about a client, so if some of you have heard this before, I did have a client tell me once, if I can sit and enjoy a bowl of ice cream at the end of my day and I still look happy eating it, keep me going. It's his favorite part of every day, okay? Now, for some people, that would be low priority. If he can't recognize his loved ones, but still seems to take enjoyment in that bowl of ice cream, well, for him, that was what he said. If I really seem to enjoy myself and find contentment in the simple task of life, then I'd like to keep going for a while. So we don't all have to have the same values and choices. It's just identifying what those are and trying to communicate them and put them into words. In addition to your powers of attorney imposed, I would like all of my clients to be sure that they have financial powers of attorney. This is a document that appoints someone that can access your accounts, pay bills on your behalf, enter in financial transactions for you. They can even contract for care on your behalf. That would be really important as well. Having someone joint on your account is not enough. Let me repeat. Having someone joint on your account is not enough. My clients tell me all the time, I don't need a power of attorney. I've added Joe on my account. If he needs to access something, he can just write a check himself. Well, this could create a problem in a couple of ways. Maybe not all of your income or assets are associated with that one account, right? And your bills might still be in your name, so Joe has no real authority to talk to the creditor who's calling about your bill. And also, we run into some problems because even though Joe might be a really great kid, he might get a divorce one day or run into some of his own creditor issues. And if he's joint on your account, that could really threaten or jeopardize your assets. The way around this is to make sure you have a power of attorney that's universal, that can be utilized by Joe at any financial institution to show he has authority to access these accounts and pay bills, but he's not an actual owner, okay? Now, some of my clients or people who have served as caregivers tell me, oh, these powers of attorney, they're hard to use. You know, some financial institutions do want to be sure and they see an original document. Some of them like their own form to be completed. It's not perfect, but it's definitely the best option that we have available. Okay. So I have included a picture of, in Minnesota, what we have is a statutory short form power of attorney. That's one version of a power of attorney that comes straight from Minnesota law and Minnesota legislature. The state of Minnesota put this together to be sure that if you have one of these documents done, the financial institutions that do business in Minnesota need to recognize it as long as it's validly executed. If they don't, if they give you grief or give you problems, we can push them and hold them liable for not recognizing the document. So it's a great one to have in your toolkit of important legal documents. Now, I want to kind of switch from what are essential estate planning or disability planning documents to and focus really on care. I've included a picture of an elder care continuum, and please know that you might be in different places on each line. These don't correspond perfectly in columns, they go in rows, right? So we might have someone with limited functional needs, so they can move around independently. They don't have mobility issues at this point. Or they might have limited function. So they might need to utilize their walker or an assisted device, but they're still fairly independent. They might have more limited function, which is they can utilize a walker or maybe a cane or some assistance, but for a short period of time, not a full walk, or they still need assistance getting in and out of chairs or with transfers, to even more. So people needing more hands-on services. And this could be not only physical, but mental as well. So it's not just what are your physical disabilities and needs, it's do you have issues with cognition, right? Or do we have a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's that could impact your ability to function and move through the world? And we take that ability to function all the way from now, where you are, to end of life. Then we get into what's your preferred, so where are you on that care continuum from functionality? What's your preferred care setting? Many of my clients tell me that they're going to leave home feet first, right? You can take me out of this house on a gurney. I'm not going anywhere, right? So you might have a wish to stay at home for as long as possible, or that you want, if you're a caregiver, you want to provide care for your loved one at home for as long as possible. If that's your goal, we need to do some planning to make sure that we can get there and to keep you at home with the services you need. Because living at home in isolation or having a caregiver who can't go out to run errands is not a successful care plan or life care plan. We really want to be sure that this works for all parties, the caregiver and the care receiver. Then we talk about staying at home but bringing in some assistance, and this could be informal or formal assistance. So oftentimes my clients report that they're doing fine, they're living at home independently. And as we talk throughout the meeting, I find out, that Joe that we were just talking about comes every morning to be sure that the breakfast is put on, and that Betty comes later at night to be sure that mom and dad have everything they need. The pills are laid out for the next day. And so we've got some informal caregiving happening within the family unit. and everybody's delegating a task. Maybe the neighbors are taking care of the property, so the landscaping stays up to date, or a child is. Okay, so home with some assistance can start very informally and move to more formal types of care like personal care attendants or home care services. There's also retirement communities, and that can mean different things, and we'll get into kind of those different levels of care facility options tonight, as well as assisted living and skilled nursing homes. Now, costs of care, if you have no functional limits and are living at home and you don't need any assistance, your cost of care could be zero, right? If you have significant limited function and you're living at home, you might have even greater costs, so you might be towards the higher end of this cost of care spectrum. So we want to identify if someone does have a care need, what are kind of the average costs to those cares, and to make sure that they have income or assets to sustain that, and if not, are there public benefits available to them? So there's a few things, and I'm an attorney, so we like to give disclaimers. It's in our blood. Every time you graduate law school, I think that they just give you a stamp that says, warning, disclaimer. But I want to be sure that you know that when you're planning for long-term care and how we fund care or ensure that you have a good understanding of what are the available resources for care, you should work with someone who knows about long-term care planning. And with that caveat, not all estate planning attorneys plan for long-term care. So if you're looking for someone who knows both, look at someone with the title of elder law attorney, or look at the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys website. They'll show you who nationally does this type of law and care. And then I want you to understand that good long-term care planning goes beyond just signing legal documents. It goes into what are your wishes about types of care, and trying to build a roadmap to be sure you have the resources you need should care needs increase. Okay. And then again, you'll hear me say this is probably the fourth time tonight, plan early so you have the most options available to you. There are a few critical questions when we're planning for care, and these come up with our clients over and over again. They don't word it in this way every time, but usually what brings people in to meet with an elder law attorney is, how do we access excellent care so that our loved one is able to maintain or improve their quality of life? Okay. How do we access the quality of care we need? How do we know a place can provide good quality of care? If you get what's called the Senior Care Options Guide, right? It's a big book about this thick, filled with different facilities and options and home care options. It doesn't really rate them for you, right? To say this is the best one in the area. We've gotten no complaints. Or this is brand new and we really like this geographic location and it meets what we're looking for from an apartment perspective. That's hard to find. And so we need someone to be able to help kind of cut through it all and say, what are really our options based on the type of care we need, the type of care we want, and what finances we have available to us. How do we utilize the payer sources available to fund that care? And how do we know what pays for what? Okay. That's a harder question, right? So we'll go through some of the payer sources tonight and make sure that you understand a little bit about what resources pay for care now if you have someone, a loved one in need. And then how do we protect assets? So if you're in a couple, if you're married or partnered and you want to be sure that your partner has enough assets to live on, even if you need care, how can we be sure that your spouse is going to have what they need? Or if it's really important to you to plan for leaving a legacy, a financial legacy to your loved ones, how do we preserve assets so they're not all gobbled up on long-term care expenses? So, what are people's primary concerns about care? And I've listed a few here that clients tell me, but if you have other concerns, let me know. This is a participatory part of the presentation. So, one big concern that people have is, how do we make sure that our loved one has the care they need, but they're safe too? How do we be sure that the place that we're leaving them can give them care and we can trust the caregivers there? How can we live in the least restrictive environment? So this goes back to that, I never want to leave home, right? Or it could be, I'd like to live in assisted living with my spouse, even as my care needs progress. How do I do that? How do I stay out of a nursing home? Often people are concerned about maintaining autonomy or control of their decision making. So I've recently started working with a client in his 50s, and he had a pretty catastrophic stroke. He's having some mobility issues, and he's cognitively in good shape, but he's having a hard time communicating. He still wants to be a participant and be in control of the process. He wants to be the driver. He'd like his care team to help support him, right? So how do we make sure that he stays in the driver's seat? What is this all going to cost? That is another big concern. How much is it to pay for care right now? If I need to move into an assisted living, what can I expect? Isolation is something that I'm probably more concerned about for my clients than they communicate to me. So usually if we have a single individual, or even if we have a couple and they are serving as a caregiver, care receiver, it can be very isolating. And we want to be sure that they have the support they need. And how do we protect them so both players, the care receiver and the caregiver, have the support needed so they have good quality of life? And I think that recent research and studies have shown that being isolated is just as bad as being a lifetime smoker. So we see that higher cases of depression and isolation, anxiety lead to same health outcomes as individuals who maybe have made environmental choices or health decisions. And then what will happen to my family unit? How is this going to change my relationship with my loved one or my caregiver? This is really pronounced in not only spouses, but parent-child relationships. Often this is one of the biggest struggles, and it starts with something like, who's going to take away mom's keys? Mom used to take away my keys, right? When I was being irresponsible and 16. Who's going to take away mom's now that she's having a hard time navigating? Should mom be part of this decision? Should we just tell mom that it's time for her to stop, right? This feeling of, what is my normal role? What's my natural role? And what is it now that the individual I love has more functional limitations? Okay, so I would say that every family struggles with that change, and it can happen if the spouse is the caregiver, it can happen with children, it can happen with neighbors. Where do I fit into this? I'm not family, but I've known this person for 20 years. How do I navigate this change? Are we scared yet, right? Long-term care is what I would say one of the scarier parts of planning. But by going through and knowing what your wishes are and identifying what your fears and concerns are and trying to plan and problem solve around them, we can feel really good about having this roadmap in place, and also knowing that if things go not as planned, we have places that we can turn off. So let's start walking through what home care options are, because there's different types of home care and there's different types of care in long-term care facilities. So I've kind of listed some of the home care options, as well as a short definition next to it. So we have traditional home care, which is actually really chore services. Okay, so a lot of home care facilities don't actually provide care required for a skilled nurse or even a personal care attendant. It is really more supervisory or custodial care. They can do some light housekeeping. They can be there as a monitor for your loved one. They can be available to take you grocery shopping. Home care is often just chore services. If they entitle it home health care, then they often have the ability to do both chore services as well as more hands-on care. Typically, we want to screen home care to see, are they going to be able to offer the level of care we need, and do they have the staffing to support it, right? And we'll go through some of the questions we have for home care providers. The person who's often with you when you're getting care at home is a personal care attendant, a PCA, or a certified nursing assistant, CNA. These individuals are people who have some training, and they can do a lot with the supervision of a nurse or a licensed nurse practitioner. There's also respite care options, and respite care is usually a home care provider who you've met with and who's familiar with your family, and they're not maybe providing regular care, but they are hired for temporary respite on your behalf. So if your caregiver needs to take a vacation, if they need regularly scheduled breaks, or maybe 1 week in a month they'd like to not be on call, right? Respite is caregiver relief, and it's coverage for that. It's usually beneficial that we plan for respite needs before the real need emerges. Okay, so stats show that caregivers are more likely, or 60% more likely, to die before their care receiver. Whoa. Sit with that for a minute, right? It's very scary. So a caregiver is more likely than not to die before their care receiver, and that's because of the stress that caregiving puts on that individual, and it's because they don't often get what they need to take care of themselves, like going to their own doctor's appointments, or having downtime, or the ability to rest and reflect. So we need to be sure that we're not only taking care of the individual with a chronic need, we need to take care of the caregiver as well. So don't be afraid of trying to get some of this stuff lined up before a problem gets worse. So often what I tell people is most home care providers will offer a free assessment, and they offer some ability to ask some questions and get an outline of what their costs are, and they'll do that assessment and give some suggestions, and you can talk to them about when you would want to utilize them and how and in what way. Frequently there's a complaint from my clients that they don't like having strangers in the house, or they feel like if this person's there, they should be doing something at all points. They don't want them sitting there on their phones, right? So we want to ask questions on the front end about what is their day-to-day care plan. What are their tasks going to be when they arrive? Those are things that we need to plan for and be assertive with, so we are sure that you're getting the care you want and need and you're contracting for, and the provider can be upfront about whether they can really do that. Okay. There's also adult day programs, and whoever handles the marketing for adult day programs, right? This is the worst name in the history of care. Adult day. We think of adult day as daycare. We think of daycare as childcare, right? Adult day programs, I like to call it the men's club, the women's club, the clubhouse. We want to be sure to have a place that's available and can provide a set number of hours per day for your loved one. And you can identify how many days per week your loved one goes. But this is a great source of relief for caregivers. And oftentimes we utilize it if we need help. We have a working caregiver who is going to be gone for a large chunk of the day, and they need to be sure while they're gone, their loved one is supervised and taken care of. There's usually meals. They might even do some bathing. Some adult day programs offer bathing services, meal services, and some light medication management. So it's a great resource. It's off-site. Even though I've identified it as home care, it's a tool that people utilize if they're staying at home but need care support. It's not a home care option where people come into your home. And there are palliative and hospice care providers that come into your home. Okay, so palliative and hospice, to qualify for palliative or hospice care, you generally need to have a diagnosis from your provider that says that you have or your loved one has less than 6 months to live. Now, don't worry, they don't hold you to that, right? One guy gets my jokes. So, hospice and palliative care is treatment for individuals who elect comfort care only, right? They want pain management. They want someone checking in, overseeing them. They usually check vitals and make sure that the families have the tools they need to navigate kind of end of life. So those providers can come into your home, but there are also inpatient or residential hospice facilities that we'll talk about later. So what should we consider when we're evaluating home care providers? I talk to my clients a lot, even before they start interviewing home care providers, about their home setup and design. How many of you want to stay at home for as long as possible? Some, most of you? Okay. How many of you have stairs in your home? Some of you? Okay. So that's okay if we have the tools we need to navigate stairs, even with functional limitations, right? So if your home setup can be made workable for you, that even with functional limits, you can navigate stairs. For example, you can put in a chairlift to your home, or you can move bedrooms, right? Yes, sir.
Yeah, how much for a chairlift?
How much for a chairlift? Depends how nice your chairlift is. So that's really the case. You can do a lot of chairlifts that come in, and I would say typically around $7,000 to get one that's workable and safe and sizable enough for most adults. There are some cheaper options, but they often are smaller and harder to, less sustainable, okay? Is it deductible? It's a medical expense. So on your taxes, if you're spending more than 10% of your AGI on medical expenses, it is deductible. If not, then no, it's not really. That's just an out-of-pocket expense. So the other thing about home design and setup is, if your laundry's in the basement, is there a way for us to bring it up? Or do you have a plan for a caregiver to do it on your behalf, right? I recently spoke with a family, and the client was trying to plan ahead for their long-term care plan, and we spoke about their desire to stay at home. And as we went through, could we add, a handrail here, or could we add a grab bar here? Could we move maybe the laundry up to this coat closet? Well, we don't want to do that. Oh no, that's not how we like our house set up, right? We don't want to move or add this accessibility feature. Do you only have a tub? Do we have the ability to put in a walk-in? We don't want a walk-in. We don't like walk-ins. They don't look nice. Okay, so we have to talk through and be real about if you want to stay at home, no matter what your functional limitations are, can we make your home conducive to it? And are you open to making those changes? If the answer is no, we're not open to it, then I want us to talk realistically about, okay, what is your next best option? If this is no longer functional for you and you're not going to be able to stay here, what's a good plan B? We don't love to compromise, but we may have to. So let's make sure our plan B is the best possible. We also want to talk a lot about what level of care is needed, because the level of care when it comes to home care is going to vary greatly about what providers can do and offer. There are home care providers who can provide 24-hour per day, very high level of skilled care to you or your loved one. There's a significant cost if you need 24-hour per day home care. I had a client recently who was receiving 24-hour per day home care in the metro area, and she was paying $18,000 per month. $18,000. Now, her functional limitations were very high. She needed a lot of care, hands-on care. She needed pretty much assistance with all of her activities of daily living. That's things like bathing, dressing, grooming. It's transfers or mobility. Those items, she needed assistance with all of them. And she needed help 24 hours a day due to her memory loss. She was not safe to stay at home without someone cueing her or doing hands-on support. This wasn't something that the family, because of their financial ability, could sustain for very long. Even if we plan well for our retirement, most of us don't plan for $15,000 per month or more of expenses. Okay, so we have to figure out what are the, at what point do we want to pursue a plan B that might be a little bit less costly. We can also talk a little bit about availability of your loved ones to help provide managerial support for that care. I think that what we want to be sure when we're evaluating home care providers is that they're going to provide you the level of care you need, but they also have adequate staffing. Because what's going to happen if the PCA you have on call that day doesn't show up? Who's going to offer the care then? Is someone going to be available? Do they always send a backup? So I talk to my clients a lot about, do we have a loved one who can manage this, a caregiver who can get on the horn and talk to that provider and facility? Do we have family members who can step in? Home care does take some management, more so I think than if you were in a facility that you weren't managing people coming in and out of your home. Okay. Now, I think that the good home care providers make sure that they have all those plans in place or those backups, but we want to ask the questions on the front end rather than being caught in a bind. And then I really want to be honest that there is some discomfort with having strangers in your home. They won't be strangers forever, but if your loved one has memory loss and may have some paranoia, I've had clients lock out their home care attendants, right? or they come to show up and they don't recognize them and they won't let them in the home, they call 911, right? So if this is the primary plan and your loved one has a lot of anxiety towards strangers and will not allow them in the house, then we need to talk through whether this is the best option for a care setting. We've talked a little bit about cost considerations and staffing availability. Just as there's a laundry list of home care options, there's even more options when it comes to long-term care facilities. And these are harder, or have been historically harder, to suss out who does what and what's offered, okay? So there is independent living, of course, and often this is my client's first move. They might downsize from their homestead to a senior living apartment or community that's 55 plus. There's no care services. This is a rental. It's an apartment or a condo. It offers no hands-on care or coordination of that care on your behalf. Strictly apartment setting, just because it's 55 plus is just a community or a limitation on who can rent or reside. We also have assisted livings, and as Sarah talked about right before I came on this evening, the state of Minnesota has recently passed, as in the last 2 days, the assisted living bill, which will have a licensure now and criteria for assisted living. And assisted livings, and I'll come back to you right now, but assisted livings are places that are rental units with the ability to contract for care. And just a little bit of history, because people tell me, why did we not have an assisted living licensure before? Why were assisted livings pretty much unregulated? And I can tell you that back in the 80s, it started where we had this return to a community. We didn't want people to live in skilled nursing homes or institutions. We wanted people to stay at home and stay in their communities as long as possible. And for that reason, as well as a huge number of nursing home beds, the state of Minnesota put a moratorium on building new nursing home beds in the state. And meanwhile, there's this cultural phenomenon that we all want to live in the least restrictive environment, right? And we want great quality of care, and we want the ability for our units to be ours, right? Our rentals or assisted living homes or our apartments to really be exactly what we wanted them to be. And what's emerged is that the assisted livings flourished, skilled nursing facilities, no new beds were made, and it was very easy for companies to come in and build assisted livings to meet the senior care needs of the community. Now, we would have never realized at the time all this happened the ramifications of it, right? We didn't realize when assisted livings were springing up all over the state that we were going to experience assisted livings that made promises, a lot of promises that they couldn't keep. That they would tell people in their marketing that they could care for them from when they sign their contract to end of life, but if you run out of money, we're going to evict you. If you need more care than we can provide, we're going to tell you that this is no longer a good fit, and we have all the control because we're your landlord. Okay. So a lot of issues began popping up, and that's why there was a need to change Minnesota law, and that we've been working on this for the last couple of years, driving it, and due to a lot of great reporting, actually, this drew the attention of Governor Dayton. Okay, so the Star Tribune did a series regarding assisted living facilities and really crimes against seniors, and that really drew attention to the issue on a broad basis. What was your question, sir?
Nursing homes are rated by the state of Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Assisted living going to be rated?
So, nursing homes have been rated by the state of Minnesota, and the question is, will assisted living facilities be rated? And to be honest, I don't know if that portion made it to the last part of the bill. I haven't read the one that got signed in entirety yet, but that was part of the push by consumers and advocates alike. Everyone wanted to know kind of where they lined up or how many complaints there were against them. And so I think that the idea is that that information is going to be more widely accessible to a consumer evaluating these choices. Yeah, great question. So we have what is called memory care, and memory care really means nothing, okay? In Minnesota, memory care has meant it's a marketing name. It's a name that assisted living facilities add if they can provide enhanced level of services. It typically means that they have an area of a facility, and it's usually assisted living. That means it's housing with services or a rental that can contract for care that's secured and locked. Okay, that's the baseline typically for being called memory care. You have locks that people can't get out or in without entering a code or being able to navigate the lock system. Okay, or they have trackers or bracelets. Okay, so that's memory care is usually structured around making sure that there is protective access to make sure that people who are wander risks are safe and protected. Now, what I see in a lot of assisted living facilities is even if people don't need memory care, but they require an advanced or an enhanced level of care with open doors and people higher staffing ratio, those individuals sometimes are placed in memory care because the assisted living, that's the only unit within the building that can offer that higher or heightened level of care. Okay, so yes. Right. Yeah. So the question was, if you're married or coupled and your spouse needs memory care and you don't, are you going to be able to stay with your spouse in a shared unit? And the answer is it depends on the facility. So assisted living and memory care is all on a per contract basis what they can offer or will offer, and that's been part of the confusion, is that you can go to one assisted living and they'll tell you that they'll provide X, Y, and Z, but the other one provides A, B, and C. So it's very difficult to know what's uniform from their offerings. What you would want to do if you were looking for a place and you were hoping to stay with your loved one, you're going to want to ask on the front end that if my loved one needs memory care, am I able to stay in their shared unit with them? Some places do support that, others do not, and some of my clients have indicated that they don't want it because depending on the functionality of other residents in that unit, it may impact their own quality of life. Okay, so these are the hard conversations about, are we going to stay together in a residence or a living situation, or at what point we're going to maybe go different courses in that treatment plan. Then there's continuing care retirement communities, and CCRCs, there's a few big ones in the Twin Cities. One is Friendship Village. It's been around for a number of years. Another one is Trillium Woods. That's more in the Plymouth area. These are communities that you pay a large down payment on. Often people sell their homes and then use the sale proceeds from their home to purchase or buy in. So it's what we call a large capital deposit So you put that in, and then what they do is they lock a rate for you, and it's a rate you pay every single month. So it's not like you pay in and then you're done paying, right? You pay in, and then you have a rental rate or an amount per month, and that doesn't change regardless of if your care needs change. So that's kind of the cornerstones of CCRCs. They're often cost prohibitive to clients. Those individuals who can qualify generally need to have, the company wants to be sure that you have enough for not only that down payment, but you have enough in your savings to really take you through end of life there. So there's also nursing homes, right? Nursing homes are what all of us kind of shudder at the thought. But my sister is a director of nursing at a nursing home, so kind of both of us are in this caregiving arena. And it depends, right? Just like any place, quality of care is going to be dependent on the facility. But the one thing we do know about nursing homes is they all offer a high level of care, and they have access to nurses round the clock. It's not just that they're on call, there's somebody boots on the ground at all hours of the day. And then we have inpatient hospice or hospice care facilities. There's these, I'm forgetting, NC Little is a good example in Edina. NC Little is an inpatient hospice care facility that only provides hospice care, and you pay monthly for that care. So how do we evaluate long-term care facilities? Just like home care, there are some questions that we have to ask when we're trying to figure out the long-term care arena. One, of course, would be what we know about quality of care, if we can figure it out, right? If we have referrals for loved ones, if we have a professional who knows about long-term care and can figure out if there have been complaints and other issues with the facility, the type of care they can offer. Can they offer everything that is on their flashy brochures or nice printed gloss brochures? What type of care do they really offer? What type of staffing do they have available? I often ask questions about their staffing to resident ratio. Do they have 2-to-1? Do they have 3-to-1? That means usually resident to care provider and not the other way around. So there's usually, if your loved one needs a lot of hands-on care and transfers, we have to talk about staffing and availability. Often we talk about engagement. So sometimes what pushes someone to move from their home to a long-term care facility is either a care crisis, or maybe the isolation has become so problematic that we want to get them someplace where they can be more involved, have more engagement with friends in the community. So what are the activities? What are the social outlets? Do they offer busing? Do they take you out ever? Those sorts of questions are important if engagement is important to you. Geographic location plays a big role, and geographic location is really not only important to the care receiver, right? It's important to the caregiver who's traveling to visit you there. So sometimes we talk to clients, and often this is what brings a lot of snowbirds back home to Minnesota. Okay, so many of my clients started in Minnesota, may have moved for a while to Arizona or Florida, and they're returning to the state of Minnesota because their loved ones and caregivers are here. And those are the individuals who are going to be checking on them, checking in with them, and assisting in their care and treatment plan. Here we get into some cost of care studies, and Genworth has been doing research on cost of care for a number of years. And you'll see on the chart there what are some averages. So a nursing home private room rate in the Minneapolis-St. Paul on average is about $7,500 per month. And for assisted living facility care, you see it about $4,000 a month. But you should note that that doesn't include any services. It does not include any services. So this average cost that's here for assisted living is what you would go in and pay as base rent. If you need, and rent usually includes a food plan, right? But it does not include if you need medication management, if you need somebody to help you every time you hit the call button, if you need someone to help with bathing, dressing, and grooming. Those are all a la carte and are not found in these averages. Yes? What's happened in 3 years? I can tell you that it's bumped up a little bit. What I see typically for if you need services in assisted living, the average is nearly $7,500 to $8,500 per month in the metropolitan area. For nursing home, close to $9,000. Okay. And for home care or home health, again, this is the difference between home health aid rates and homemaker services, but the average cost for home health aides is $5,500 per month and $4,800 if you're just getting homemaker services. And the adult day rate is on average about $1,700 per month. So you can see statewide averages there. We're a little behind with all data related to cost of care. It always takes a while to get these studies done and the information computed. But another resource that I will share with you is the Minnesota Department of Human Services has put together what's called Own Your Own Future, or Own Your Future. And Own Your Future is a website that they've put together to give you some guides, and it is similar to what we're talking about today, so you understand what are an outline of our legal or practical considerations, what are average costs of care, what are some of those considerations, and some of this data is from what the states assembled. So if you're getting 44 hours per week for home health care, that's an average of $60,000 per year. In assisted living, the average per year is $48,000, and that would make sense from what I told you about $4,000 being the base rate in essence, but it goes up if you add care. Nursing home is at $90,000 per year for skilled nursing. Yes. Right. So the question was, are we going to talk about waivers and how to pay for that care when you run out of money? And the answer is yes. That's a great segue to who funds long-term care and what are the payment sources for this, because now we know the numbers, right, or the averages, but what does this mean for us on a day-to-day basis? Most of us with our Social Security, no matter what jobs we have throughout our lifetime, don't have enough from our income streams alone to cover the numbers that we just went through, right? So from income alone, we often don't have enough to pay for care out of pocket, just on income and expenses. We usually have to dip into other assets and resources to pay for care. So there are multiple payment sources for care, and you'll see that the primary one is private pay. Okay, most people, what you should know is that medical assistance, for example, or Medicaid is a payor of last resort. That means that you have to have pursued every other option or private assets first before you qualify for that program. So one payment source is private resources. The other payment source is long-term care insurance, and I would say that's also a private resource, right? The people who have it have paid into it and now can draw a benefit if it's needed. Medicare is a payment source, but it's usually a temporary payment source for long-term care. Medicare generally covers acute care. Medicare does not cover chronic care conditions in general. Okay. Medical assistance is what the state of Minnesota calls Medicaid, and waivers fall within the medical assistance program. And then there are also veterans benefits available. So how many veterans do we have in the audience today? A few, 5 maybe? So veterans benefits can also help fund care. What you should think about is Medicare is an insurance program, and most health insurance programs are meant to fix you if you are unwell, right? So if you break something, it wants to repair your break and get you back to health. Medicare is set up to do that with chronic need, or if you have a long-term care or illness. So if you break your hip, Medicare generally covers the surgery for replacement and a period of time of rehab, right? So there is a rehabilitation that's associated with the coverage. So generally, Medicare covers acute need or healthcare crises, and then rehabilitation for a finite period of time, and only after you meet certain criteria. So Medicare is not going to be your primary source of payment if we have chronic need. If we look at long-term care needs or chronic care needs, private assets and income are first with that long-term care insurance. Then we can seek the veterans benefits or Medicaid. So how are you eligible for Medicaid or medical assistance in Minnesota? Minnesota resident. If you're not a Minnesota resident and you move here with the intent to stay here, you can become one, right? So the residency is the primary or first requirement. You also either have to be age 65 or older, blind or disabled, and require a skilled nursing facility level of care. This means that even if you're at home and not in skilled nursing, or you're in assisted living or memory care, you've been assessed by the county to have a nursing facility level of care need. Okay. So this means generally you have some hands-on cares, or you require care because of dementia or Alzheimer's or a condition that makes you vulnerable. And you have to meet financial eligibility rules, and that's the real kicker. So what are those eligibility rules? What are the maximum available assets? If you're a single individual and you have more than $3,000 in your name of available assets, that means that you are not going to financially qualify for medical assistance. That means that you will have had to reduce assets. You'll have to privately pay from your resources until you meet the threshold of $3,000 or less of available assets. And we'll talk about what available assets are so you know a little bit more about that. If you are, yes, ma'am. Yep, so we're going to get to that. So if you are an institutionalized spouse, which means that you need care and your spouse does not need care, they live in the community or they're in a facility with you, but they're not receiving or in need of medical assistance, the max they can keep is $126,420. Okay, so the community spouse means the spouse who's not applying for benefits, but their assets are also capped. If you have two spouses that are married, both in need of care, long-term care, and both need medical assistance, then both of them have to be at $3,000 or less, so $6,000 in total. These numbers are not a lot for people to live on well sometimes. So I think that first let's identify how they categorize assets. And I use the buckets. You can talk about them as buckets or silos, or how we categorize assets when we look at eligibility. So the yellow bucket with the scared and nervous face is the bucket for those assets that are countable or available. Available assets means they're counted towards the thresholds that we just discussed. They're available and on hand to pay for care if you need it. The green bucket is what's called unavailable assets. These assets, we have to report them, we have to acknowledge them, but they're not going to hold these assets against you when it comes to eligibility. Here's an example of an unavailable asset. It's rare. You're the beneficiary, you're named as an heir in a probate, but you don't have the cash yet. You know you're entitled to it, but you haven't received it yet. You have to report that you have money coming to you, but you don't have it in your hands. You can't get to it now, so it's unavailable for the time being. If you own a property jointly with a sibling, and that sibling's not going to let you sell it without their permission, right? We have to notify the county that you have this asset, but they're not going to count the value of that asset, depending on how it's titled, as available to pay for care. And then the blue bucket, the smiley face, those are exempt assets. Those are the assets that they don't count towards your eligibility. So, there's a little guide here. Available or counted assets are things like cash, investment accounts, retirement accounts, 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, the cash surrender value on life insurance, and non-homestead real estate, like cabins, rental properties. Yes?
Can you talk about spouses? So let's say there's a pension and the name of one spouse. Do all the retirement accounts in the household count for it?
So here's an example. You have a spouse, husband needs care, wife is living in the community. The maximum that wife can keep in a retirement account then, or all of these countable available assets, is $126,420. If she has assets in a retirement account that exceed it, they're not going to be eligible for medical assistance. Okay. So it's a great question. We do, when it comes to medical assistance, differentiate between assets and income. What I'm talking about here is what's available to pay for care from assets. Income is treated differently. So if you have a pension that's coming to the community spouse's pension, her income, is protected. It goes to her. It doesn't have to be used on her spouse's cost of care. Okay.
Just say that again.
Yeah. So if you have a spouse who needs care, their income will be utilized for their cost of care. The spouse who doesn't need care, their income is protected and does not have to be used towards their spouse's cost of care.
So you're talking pensions there. Are you also talking about annuities?
Annuities are treated differently, and so annuities are one of those it depends questions or answers. So an annuity that has a cash surrender value is considered an available asset. So if you have a deferred annuity, an investment that's giving you a rate of return or a guaranteed rate of return, but you can go to that annuity holder and say, I want to cash this out. Excuse me, give me that value that's been sitting with you. That's considered an available asset, even if you're drawing an income stream from it. just like an IRA, you have to take out your required minimum distributions after age 70 and a half. But that gives you an income stream, but really that income stream's coming from an asset. Okay? When I talk about a spouse's income being protected, I'm talking about straight income that's not associated with a cash surrender value. This is generally Social Security and traditional pensions. Okay. So, yes.
Joint accounts affected.
How are joint accounts treated? Well, if it's a joint account or a cash account, it's an available asset. So what we do generally, if somebody needs medical assistance, is that items that are joint go to the other spouse. The only thing that we keep joint is kind of one direct deposit account or a nominal joint account to collect income and pay bills from.
What about trust?
Trusts are treated in general as available assets.
Joint trust, I mean, with the,
Yeah, if you're married and you have a joint trust, those are considered available assets when we apply for medical assistance.
the affected spouse.
If you drop the affected spouse, then that won't affect their eligibility. Okay, so that's pretty complex planning, and we can talk about that. That's probably better talked about one-on-one, because it depends how you have your trust set up on what you can do. Okay, so yes.
Can the community spouse keep his or her entire Social Security?
The community spouse, after their spouse, the institutionalized spouse, is eligible for medical assistance, then the community spouse's Social Security goes to them alone, goes to the community spouse. So you would be able to keep your Social Security check if your spouse was eligible for medical assistance. Okay. Now, what sometimes gets confusing is that the income budgets are something that's prescribed. So your spouse, if they entered long-term care and were eligible for medical assistance, her income would be used towards her cost of care, less any allowable deductions. And one of those deductions can be making sure the community spouse has a baseline amount of income of their own. Okay. So let's go back to assets. We've been talking about income, but I want to bring you back to the asset rules, okay? Exempt assets are those assets that aren't counted. These are in the blue bucket. And those assets that aren't counted are a homestead, a vehicle of any value, personal property, and a pre-funded funeral. One vehicle is exempt per household. So if you have two, you can keep both, but it counts as an available asset towards that $126,420. So these are assets that don't impact eligibility. And then we have those sneaky unavailable assets, and those are certain jointly held assets or assets of an unprobated estate or that are pending or caught up in a legal action. They're rare. That's why I don't spend a lot of time on them. Most people, the majority of their assets are what we call available. Then they have some exempt or protected. So what's the deal with the look back period anyways? A lot of people have a lot of questions about what the look back rules are. The look back rules are those rules that say if you give assets away or transfer assets for less than fair market value, and you've transferred those assets within the last 60 months or 5 years, they have to be reported when you apply for medical assistance. Now, what I need you to know is that this is traditionally gifts, things that you've written checks for. It can also be loans if you're not collecting any payment on them. So some of my clients say, it wasn't a gift, Johnny's going to pay me back. I say, are you charging Johnny interest? Is he making monthly payments to you? No, it was a gift. I hate to break it to you. It's a gift for purposes of medical assistance. If you transfer something of value and don't receive fair market value for that, then it's considered a transfer. Now, when we apply, we look at the 5 years preceding. What you should know is the medical assistance rules do not match the IRS rules about gifting. Some of my clients, and this just happened this last week, I had 2 siblings come in to talk about planning for their parents and applying for medical assistance. They said, yeah, mom and dad have been gifting to us, but they do, the $10,000 or $15,000 that's allowed every year. They never do more than that. Well, all of that is considered improper transfers for medical assistance. So the gifting rules with IRS do not match the gifting rules for medical assistance, okay? So what happens if you've gifted assets away and you have run out? So now we have to apply anyways. We're not through the 60 months yet. What happens then? We have to report those gifts on the application. And what they do is they take the total amount of gifts that were made in that 60-month period, they add them up, and they divide it by the statewide average cost of skilled nursing care, which the state has said is $7,288 per month. Nice round numbers with all of this. Did you notice that? Makes the math very easy for us, right? So what that means is that they take that big dollar figure that you've gifted, use the divisor of 7,288, and then that equates to a number of months that you're ineligible for benefits. So what happens then? You have reduced your assets, you don't have them in your name, right? And now you have this period of ineligibility. You better hope that Johnny still has that money, right? We better hope that Johnny loves you and isn't going to leave you high and dry and is going to help pay for that care to make it through. If you do not have that money, if it's been spent, then we need to plan for what then. Now, there is something called a hardship waiver where we ask the county, we pray for the county's forgiveness. We say, look, we did this bad thing, but we can't get that money back. We can't do anything about it. So what are we're not going to have a place to live unless you fund our care. What I need you to know about hardship waivers is they're a little like unicorns. We hear of them, we see them rarely, okay? So this should not be your plan, is to say, that'll be fine. We'll figure it out if it happens. We want to be really intentional when it comes to transferring assets or making gifts to be sure that that money is indeed protected and doesn't have to be clawed back in, okay? Now, the other thing you should know is that spouses can transfer money between the two of their names without penalty. So there's a 5-year look back to transfers to individuals other than spouses. So a husband and wife can exchange title of accounts or money without problem. For example, if you have something in your spouse's name and they now need care, you can move that to your name and it can be part of your $126,420.
So I'm concluding not to make any gifts whatsoever to one's children.
You are concluding not to make gifts to anyone's children. I would say that I do not agree with that. I think that if you make gifts to your children, we want to do so according to a plan that we plan for, and we're strategic about whether it's realistic that you've retained enough assets in your name to make it through 5 years. And we want to maybe work with the kids to make sure that they don't spend that money or utilize it, and they hold it for the just in case. And so the answer is you can do gifting to your children, but I wouldn't do so without a plan and without good, competent counsel. Okay. Medical assistance giveth, and they taketh away. Okay? What I mean by that is that if you receive medical assistance benefits during your lifetime, those benefits are given to you, but the state of Minnesota and the counties that administer this program are going to try and recoup it after you die. Okay? So sometimes people say to me, let's hurry up and get on medical assistance as soon as possible. But then they tell me, we really want to leave assets for our children, right? We have to make sure that you're aware that once you receive medical assistance benefits, the state's keeping a tally of how much they've paid out for you. And then upon the second of you to die, if it's a married couple, they will assert a claim against the estate. So I think about this as the Winnie the Pooh rain cloud, or that follows him around, right? So there's this little cloud that follows you around after you start receiving benefits. Now, sometimes we have to. There's not another choice always, right? So I want you to know that it's okay if we have a state recovery, but we want to be upfront about understanding what the terms of it are. And wow, it's complicated. Yeah. So a state recovery, here's a good example. Say that as a husband and wife, you were able to keep the $126,420 and a house, right? And your car. And now you have these assets in your name, and that your spouse received $100,000 worth of benefits. That means the county paid out for your care or your spouse's care $100,000. Both of you die. There's this $126,420 in an account. There's a house. Those assets are subject to a claim of $100,000. There's still going to be something left in that hypothetical, but we have to repay the claim. So it is complicated, but that's why I kind of break it down to say, if you get a benefit from the state, they are going to try and recoup it.
That kind of encourages the community spouse to really spend this $126,000 plus his own.
Yeah, so it encourages the spouse to use the money on them, right, and not leave it in a pot. Yeah. I would say that if we're worried about if the primary concern is taking care of the spouse, then we want to be sure the spouse lives well with the money that they're able to keep. And we should be less worried after medical assistance about keeping money for the kids or the survivors. Okay. So we're running out of time, so I am going to speed through some of this. But there are also veterans benefits that are available to veterans and spouses of veterans. One is a state benefit through the Minnesota Veterans Homes. And those locations are Minneapolis, Silver Bay, Fergus Falls, Laverne. And coming soon, there will be Bemidji, Preston, and Montevideo. Okay. The one that most people in the metro or Twin Cities area go to is the Minneapolis location. It's located near the Ford Parkway or the Ford Dam there on the edge of Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's been there for a number of years, but what you should know is it's been incredibly renovated. So the old historic part has been completely redone on the inside, as well as they've built 100 new beds that are all private rooms, private bathrooms. So In order to be eligible, a veteran needs to have served at least 6 months and a day on active duty and have either lived in Minnesota or had their service credited here. Spouses can also be eligible. Okay? But I do have to say that there's a little bit of a wait list for this program. Okay, so I am going to go into the wait list a little bit in Minnesota, or the Minneapolis branch particularly. We have about a year wait for a veteran, and we have about 2 to 3 years for spouses of a veteran. So we want to be sure that we plan again early before a crisis or a need to ensure that when your name comes up, you're ready. The other thing that we want to let you know is that you do have to, similarly to medical assistance, have some financial need in order to be eligible. If the resident's assets are down to $3,000, all they have to contribute is their income. The spouse of a veteran does not have to contribute any assets or income. So if you have a husband and wife, one has the spouse who's not in need of care has $1 million in their name, as long as the resident at the veteran's home has less than $3,000 in their name, the only thing that has to be used is the resident's income towards their cost of care. The $1 million does not need to be used or reduced or spent down. So, unlike medical assistance that requires both the institutionalized spouse and the community spouse to have a level of impoverishment, the Minnesota Veterans Home doesn't have that requirement. Okay. And there's no estate recovery. So they'll give this benefit and they don't try to recoup it. The other difference from medical assistance is the asset transfer rules. The look back's only 1 year versus 5. Okay. There is also an excellent benefit through the federal VA, and this is a non-service connected pension. A non-service connected pension means it's not a pension based on retirement or years of service. It is not connected to the length of service, other than you need 90 days or more on active duty, one of which had to have fallen during a wartime period. You have to have discharge other than dishonorable, so honorable or medical, and limited assets and income to qualify. This program, ever since October of 2018, does have a maximum net worth calculation, and I'm going to run to that next so we don't run out of time here, but net worth for this program can't exceed about, similar to medical assistance, it's $127,061. So previously, before October of last year, there was no look back rule for this benefit. And ever since October, there was a new law, a change that came through, and now there's a 3-year look back for it. And we have to always be cognizant, if we're gifting, to plan for one program, how it could impact others, like medical assistance. So I know that we've covered a lot of ground in the last 2 hours, and it can be really overwhelming to try to navigate, again, levels of care, quality of life, documents that are needed, and payer sources for care. So I want you to really know that there are organizations out there that, such as mine, that work with you to develop a life care plan. And a life care plan is really a plan for you, or that roadmap, to be sure that we think of not just your essential legal documents, but your health, safety, and well-being. And we really offer kind of a team approach for that. And so we want to be sure that we have a competent elder law attorney. We work with a social worker. We have a full-time social worker on staff at our office, and We do that because we needed to know and be on call about what's going on at the facilities in town. We need somebody who's in the know, talks to other social workers, knows what places have availability and how to navigate those wait lists. We also have full-time public benefits specialists that work with us for applying for medical assistance and veterans benefits. But we're just this professional organization is just one part of your team. Your loved ones and care providers are a huge part of this as well. Your healthcare providers, professionals such as your financial advisor, your accountant, these are all individuals that we want to be sure are in the know about your medical need and financial need and are all working in unison and lockstep to make sure that you have a plan that's right for you and know how to carry it out. The other things that are really important, and I think you should also add as part of your support system, is a therapist or support group. And right now we have individuals working with placement assistance. Death doulas are relatively new in popular culture. I will be certified after 2 weeks from now as a death doula. Don't be scared. I promise not to wear a black cloak, right? But the idea is that it's very hard to navigate all of this alone, and we need people who are trained to know what happens not only physically at end of life, but emotionally, legally, and financially to be sure that you have an advocate throughout the process. So, spend some time, consider your values and legacies, start to get organized, build this team around you, and then start figuring out what your roadmap contains. It's not something that's going to you do once and it just stays stagnant. Unfortunately, I tell my clients, it's something that you're going to want to pull off your shelf and think about annually. You don't necessarily need to meet with an attorney every year, but it is something that you should keep fresh because your life is going to change, your caregiver's life is going to change, and we need to be sure that your plan is malleable enough to change with your need. So thanks so much for coming tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time. Let me know if you have any questions.
Do you think the $126,420 amount?
The question was, do I think the $126,420 will go up? And the answer is it does go up every year, but it goes up fractionally. So I think when I started practicing 7 years ago, it was maybe 121,000 and some change. So you can tell that rate doesn't quite match inflation. Okay? Yes. So the question was related to powers of attorney. If you have a power of attorney and you've named your spouse only as the attorney in fact, it's not a great plan, okay? Because we need to be sure that if your spouse is also sick or needs help, another person can step in and pay bills and access accounts on your behalf. What happens if they don't do that? If they don't do that and both are sick and neither can act on each other's behalf, then we often have to look at what's called a conservatorship, and that's a court proceeding where the court appoints someone to access accounts. The downside to that is it takes time and money to establish, and it often results in people being in limbo for a period of time. Yes, so the conservatorship process in Hennepin County and Ramsey County, if we file a petition today, it would be 6 to 8 weeks before we would have a hearing, and then the court would have to issue a court order. And so I would say probably you're another couple weeks after that before somebody would have the authority to act. Yes. You first. Go ahead. Yeah. So that's a great, yeah. So the question was related to if you've established an educational account, like a 529 for your grandchildren. So that's considered an available asset. If you're the custodian of the account, it's your asset. If you've given that money for a grandchild's education to your child and they've put it in a 529, it's considered a gift. But the answer is if we're planning for grandchildren's education, we need to make sure that we do so early so we don't have the 5-year look back issue to deal with. But a lot of my clients have concerns about that. I've gotten 2 emails in the last 3 days about, hey, we want a gift, and I had hoped some of this money could be used for my grandkids' education. Maybe instead of gifting to the kids, we'll just do this instead. It's still a gift, it's still a problem. It doesn't matter what the use is for. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
One is you said you wanted to create nothing of and include the HIPAA release form. So is there one generic kind of HIPAA release form that we can use for like every doctor receives,
Yeah.
every financial
Mm-hmm.
institution receive, every credit card company receive?
So the HIPAA release is limited to protected health information and healthcare providers. But there is a generic version of that can be used, and we have our clients sign it when they sign their other important legal documents. But I don't know of one that's available online for free to the general public. Mm-hmm.
And then you also made a comment about a Minnesota document for financial institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Would that apply to any financial institution that wasn't in Minnesota?
So there is we talked a little bit about the Minnesota Statutory Short Form Power of Attorney. That works not only for Minnesota financial institutions, but globally as well. It's broad enough to cover investment accounts or retirement accounts. The one thing to note is that some bigger institutions, I know Schwab, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, all of them like their own forms, but you can present them a Minnesota power of attorney. They'll typically just have another form to complete as well. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And does Medicaid dictate the kind of care that you can get within an in-home or
Great. Mm-hmm.
or how much control they have over the decision?
Great question. So it was related to if you qualify for medical assistance, but you're not living in a nursing home setting. That program is actually, and this goes back to your initial question, we refer to that as a waiver program, elderly waiver specifically. An elderly waiver can pay for home care. It also pays for assisted living care services, not rent, but care. And the elderly waiver program, what they do is the state assesses you or the county assesses you and determines the number of hours you're approved for or you have a need for. And then that bank can be used to pay for caregivers. Okay, so you do have to work with a provider that accepts medical assistance elderly waiver as a payor source, and not all home care providers do accept that as a payor source. So you're limited somewhat by needing someone who takes that type of benefit. Yes. So in the Care Options Guide, they have a list of care providers, and it's organized by kind of region. And in it, they also indicate whether or not they accept waiver benefits. The one thing I will note is that they're not bound to follow that, so you do need to call the provider to confirm that they will take it, because sometimes if they're filled with private pay status, they don't look or accept new individuals on a waiver program. Okay. So thanks for hanging in there. I'll be available for a few more minutes if anyone wants to chat, but I appreciate your time. Bye.
There is an evaluation form for Brenna in your folder. I know she would appreciate that. And several of the things that she talked about, which include home health care, adult day care services, support groups, social service, mental health services. If you come to the resource fair on June 13th, you will find that there are representatives from many different agencies which cover those services, so you can practice asking your questions and see what's available. There also will be an adult day service tour in the fall that's being organized by Wilder Foundation, and there is a housing series tour that's being organized by the Roseville Alzheimer and Dementia Group, and that will be in July and August. There are 2 presentations and there's a tour in between. So there's a lot more resource available to you. Yes?
Now, I think you said this program
Yes.
is going to be on this website.
Yes.
In about a week.
In about a week. And also links to the handouts and some of the things that Brenna pointed out, such as the Go Wish deck of cards and such. I will put links up for that too. So thank you all for coming.